Our film begins with Ji-woo preparing for the day ahead. She wakes up early, headphones in, as she works out in her room. Sergeant Cho happens to be waiting outside her apartment though, following in a car as she heads to school. Ji-woo bears the brunt of bullying from her classmates, partly thanks to her dad being a junkie. In fact, later that day Ji-woo is even issued a transfer, given how uncomfortable she makes the other students. It's her 17th birthday, as it turns out, and this isn't exactly a great present. Ji-woo at least gets some retribution, single-handedly taking out the bullies harassing her for so long in an impressively choreographed scene. Ji-woo heads home where her father, Dong-hoon, rings and tells her he can't make it. It's the final straw for her, as she tells her dad not to come back and that he's useless. Only he does come back. In fact, outside the front door a gunshot pierces the air. Another sees Dong-hoon collapse, blood staining the area. Dong-hoon keeps his daughter inside, protecting her as a final courageous act before he passes away. Ji-woo attends her father's funeral, of course, but so too do a lot of Dong-hoon's gangster friends. Among those is Mu-jin, the leader of this operation, who tells her that he was a loyal man and a good soldier. He also fails to disclose exactly who killed him. And worse, Sergeant Cho and the other detectives drop the case looking into his murder. Now, given Dong-hoon was on the top most wanted list and in hiding for 3 months, it's not much of a surprise. So, with little other choice, Ji-woo turns to Dong-hoon's gangster buddies. Specifically, she heads in to see Mu-jin. Given her lack of resolve in killing, he tells her to leave. Ji-woo is not ready to give up though, and an unwanted guest at her door eventually prompts her to head out that night to try and find information on her dad's killer. She even offers a 5 million won reward too. Ji-woo stupidly walks right into a trap, with her money lost and tied up in the back of a car for her troubles. However, Mu-jin returns and saves Ji-woo from a nasty demise. This young woman is hellbent on revenge, claiming she can handle anything. Well, Mu-jin takes her down to a rundown gym on the docks, where a guy called Gang-jae shows her the ropes. He wishes her luck, claiming she needs to do the laundry and dishes from now on to prove herself. Ji-woo certainly has heart though, and after hours she trains on her own, refusing to give in and not letting her peers get the better of her. Mu-jin shows up in a suit and encourages her not to fight to win, but fight to kill. Specifically, he tells her to go for the vitals in a big fight, donning boxing gloves and encouraging her to fight him. This sparring session eventually culminates in a big group skirmish, with Ji-woo one of the last ones standing, against prized fighter Gang-jae. Who will come out on top? Our next scene begins with Ji-woo squaring off against Gang-jae. The fight is brutal, but a spinning backhand jab knocks Gang-jae clean out. When he comes to, he's not exactly happy and decides to spike Ji-woo's drink. Gang-jae and Cheol-ho slither down to her room, chuckling hysterically as Ji-woo struggles to remain conscious. After kicking Cheol-ho into her father's urn, she grabs the smashed china and squeezes it tight, determined to defend herself. As Gang-jae comes at her with a hammer, she stabs him in the gut. Gang-jae is inevitably brought before Mu-jin, who's disappointed by his insolence. As punishments, he slashes Gang-jae clean across the cheek, leaving a nasty, deep gash. Given Ji-woo's poor upbringing, Mu-jin heads in to help teach her his ways. He takes her out to a restaurant where they share food and a drink. With Gang-jae expelled, Mu-jin gives her a new alias to go by, Hye-jin. He even hands over the gun used to kill Dong-hoon, which happens to be a police-issued firearm. Years pass and our Ji-woo becomes integral to the organization she's pledged herself to, going under the alias of Hye-jin and infiltrating the police force. She's quickly promoted up to narcotics, where she reports to Captain Cha, following a brash operation where she busts in on another undercover officer, Pil-do, posing as a drug dealer. In secret, Hye-jin meets Mu-jin and feeds back how she believes Captain Cha is involved in her father's murder. Part of the reason Mu-jin is so dedicated to helping Ji-woo's plight comes from his ties with Dong-hoon, who helped him out of a tricky spot year back. He showed his loyalty to the organization, so in turn, so too is Mu-jin in raising her like a daughter. Funnily enough though, Cha teams Pil-do and Ji-woo together on the same case. Pil-do's not exactly thrilled with that, as the gang prepare to bring a guy called Mango in for questioning. While this is going on, Captain Cha is convinced that Mu-jin is about to make his move, while the crime lord decides to put his faith in Ji-woo and her conviction to find her father's killer. He's also well aware that if things go sideways, then she'll need to be killed. Ji-woo can more than hold her own though, as she heads in and single-handedly takes out all the goons in the hallway. Heading to the end of the corridor, she stumbles upon a massive gambling operation. She single-handedly grabs Mango, as Pil-do catches up to her. The next scene begins with Pil-do and Ji-woo questioning Mango. They're desperate to find where the drugs are and believe that he has the answers. Well, Ji-woo is the one who finds the drugs, stashed inside an alcohol bottle behind the bar. That's enough to get him arrested, but Pil-do is concerned about Ji-woo's brash behavior. Through Mango, the group learn that there's a new dealer in town. And that man? Gang Jae. With a new drug on the market and Mu-jin's empire under threat, Ji-woo walks a fine tightrope between narcotics officer and loyal soldier for Mu-jin. Now, Ji-woo also looks into Ji-woo's father's death too, with it looking likely that the officers on the scene, including Lieutenant Cha, as the ones responsible. Ji-woo is itching to solve this drug dispute though, but Pil-do is quick to remind her that the big virtue in the narcotics department is patience. They have Mango in custody, but for now, there's a more pressing matter to deal with. Captain Cha and the others have plans to capture Mu-jin. With the operation involving two whole narcotics teams, they're desperate to find and arrest Mu-jin no matter what. Ji-woo, though, finds her stomach tightening as she struggles with her conflicting morals. The operation gets underway and the officers move in on the ship. With Mu-jin on the ropes, a rogue gunshot upsets the operation, sending sparks flying in the lab. Mu-jin does manage to get away, shooting a knowing glance at Ji-woo, who stays silent and lets him slip from their grasp. When Captain Cha heads aboard, Ji-woo's planted gun used to kill her father is found at the crime scene. All of this is a ploy to gauge his feelings, as Ji-woo watches as Cha picks up the weapon and examines the scratches on the side. Cha is desperate to find out the truth and learns that shots were not fired from the beta team. It's definitely from someone within Cha's group. He checks everyone's weapons, including Ji-woo, who also has a full chamber in her gun. Mu-jin is convinced someone is sneaking information to them, and Taeju believes it's Ji-woo. When Ji-woo heads back into the office, though, she finds that busting Mu-jin is the next step in trying to uncover what's happening in town. Numerous schematics, pictures, and diagrams are pinned up on the wall, including that of Dong-hoon. They've been after him for 4 years, and for the narcotics department it's personal, especially given their youngest member has passed away. Taking a moment's break from the others, Ji-woo phones Mu-jin and reveals that someone inside the operation is a mole and feeding back crucial information to him. She also tells him about the different cameras and where they're located, including word that she's the one who fired the shot inside the boat. Ji-woo puts herself in a compromising position, as the cameras are immediately destroyed. However, she remains undeterred, following Cha and trying to work out if he's really the one responsible. While this is going on, Gang Jae shows up with his armed goons to the fighting gym down by the docks. Armed with knives and swords, they make short work of the recruits, with Taeju the last remaining main standing. For a bit anyway, it doesn't take long before Gang Jae slashes his arm with a deep cut. Off the back of this, Pil-do rings and tells Ji-woo to head down to Dongshin Gym. When she gets there, Ji-woo finds the place a bloodbath and Taeju still alive, despite being coated in blood. Inside on the floor are the words, "I'm back." The next scene begins with Mu-jin concerned about his empire. As he watches footage from the massacre, he demands that his subordinates make sure no one speaks up or talks. Ji-woo, though, is fronting the task force determined to get answers, but no one is speaking up and the department hit a dead end. Pil-do encourages Ji-woo to keep searching though while he receives an urgent call, taking him away. In fact, he joins Cha to see Taeju and the others who are currently mourning the deceased. Mu-jin is there too, of course, and he doesn't exactly take kindly to Cha bursting in on him like this. The pair trade verbal blows, with Mu-jin vowing to make sure Cha never catches him or takes him down. When he leaves, heading back to the department, Ji-woo twiddles her thumbs, waiting for the forensic report to come back from the gun. However, the gang do manage to obtain a lead on Gang Jae, realizing that he's the one responsible. Cha understands this is his chance to catch a much bigger prize, knowing that Mu-jin is going to move soon and hit back. For the time being, he decides to release Mango. More lives will be lost, which Ji-woo is quick to point out, but the operation is due to go ahead no matter what. Ji-woo messages and informs Mu-jin that there's a trap waiting for him. However, Cha is convinced that someone from Gu-jin's organization will flip and turn to their side. Given there's already presumably a mole inside the organization, this doesn't look good. Ji-woo remains vigilant though and tails Cha, determined to find out who he's meeting. However, up on the rooftop, still sporting a motorcycle helmet, she walks right into Pil-do. The two skirmish for a bit, but there's enough of a break in the action for Ji-woo to slip away and notice the guy outside waiting for Cha is actually Taeju. Ji-woo is quick to feed this back to her boss. Although Ji-woo's position in the narcotics department is also under threat given Cha believes she's the one who's leaking information. Interestingly, Cha appears to be playing a clever game and has Pil-do check out Ji-woo's police file while it seems like Taeju was just a decoy. Cha is determined to figure out what Ji-woo's game is, although she remains fixated on the gun right now, finding out about the serial number. The gun isn't actually Cha's. It belongs to Corporal Song Junsu, the new recruit to narcotics who was killed. When Jisoo quizzes Mu-jin about this, he's adamant that they're not cop killers and believes Cha is just playing dirty. She carries this with her later on in the day, as Pil-do asks her out for a drink. She refuses, but it doesn't stop him from tailing her. Eventually he catches up, calling her out for investigating Mango and Gang Jae on her own. He joins Ji-woo for the time being, eventually questioning her resolve and ties to her father. While the pair watch Gang Jae conduct an operation, he suddenly turns around and faces the pair up on the balcony. They realize this is all one big setup, as Pil-do and Mu-jin are attacked by a group of thugs. Unfortunately, they're both captured with their phones. Pil-do is even thrown out the top window too. At the same time, numerous armed guards show up and blindside Mu-jin, who manages to hold his own. It turns out Ji-woo charging into Mango's operation was enough to get Gang-ji's attention, and he's been luring her all this time. Oh, the next scene begins with Gang Jae stabbing Ji-woo in the leg. It's a nasty, piercing blow, and the twist that ensues gives off a sickening sound. However, all off this is a ploy to bring Mu-jin out into the open, as Gang Jae takes a picture of Ji-woo and sends it on to him. Given Mu-jin has already been stabbed in the gut, he's not exactly in a great position, but he drives to meet his former subordinate nonetheless. Only, both Pil-do and Ji-woo are handcuffed in a car, which is dropped into Crusher. With time running out, Ji-woo manages to slip out to safety, thanks to Mu-jin driving square into the controls used to drop the crane and stopping it. As police sirens wail, Ji-woo manages to save Pil-do before it's too late, allowing Mu-jin to slip away. When Captain Cha and the others show up, they notice the black car that's driven straight into the controls and start to grow suspicious. Mu-jin though manages to make it back to his empire, where he's patched up and deep in thought. Taeju is not happy that Mu-jin has sacrificed himself twice for Ji-woo, but he challenges his right-hand man, asking just what he's done to make himself trustworthy. Speaking of trust, Pil-do decides to put faith in his partner, as Ji-woo undergoes surgery and recovers from her wounds. While she does, big changes are made to the narcotics team as they're now commissioned to carry firearms. At the same time, Taeju steps up his efforts to find Gang Jae, interrogating Cheol-ho and trying to find out the truth. This cat and mouse game continues, as Mu-jin's goons and the narcotics department both remain determined to get their hands on Gang Jae first. When Ji-woo awakens, Pil-do is there and he talks about his little sister. Her beer was actually spiked in the past, resulting in her death, which explains why he's so adamant on doing the right thing for narcotics. He doesn't know who's responsible, but he is determined to catch as many dealers and bring them to justice. Knowing about Ji-woo's past from her file, Pil-do remains determined to help her out. Ji-woo's conflict ion continues as she heads out for lunch with the other detectives on the force. They have chamomile tea for her, the same drink she gave Mu-jin to help with his insomnia, and they have some hot food. Unfortunately, this closeness also has the adverse effect of Taeju watching from afar and snapping pictures, sending them on to Mu-jin of her possible compromise. Knowing that his friend's daughter is deep undercover, he decides to commission her a ticket out of this setup. When Jae-woo finds out that night, Mu-jin demands that she follow his instructions and leave the country. Ji-woo refuses though, despite the dangers of staying on, as Captain Cha steps up his efforts to find out the truth. In fact, he has Jae-woo's phone bugged, with all calls received and sent monitored from now on. Only, at the station, Jae-woo runs into Sergeant Cho, who seems to recognize her. He claims it's from the Violent Crimes Department, but Jae-woo is not so sure. Inside the office, Cha and Cho discuss Jae-woo and how she completely disappeared off the grid. Cho remains tight-lipped about the truth, but when Jae-woo meets him in private later on, he's quick to divulge why. He spills that Dong-hoon's murder was buried by Cha and wishes her luck. Is he telling the truth? Or is this another mind game? Either way, a big manhunt is issued to try and find Gang Jae. Sergeant Cho though heads down to the docks and questions Mu-jin over what he's doing with Jae-woo. He scoffs and claims Mu-jin is the devil. Cho is also a junkie though, and after seemingly buying off his silence all this time, Mu-jin is convinced that his silence needs to be permanent this time. With chains weighing him down, the man is killed and thrown in the water. Returning to his empire, Jae-woo rings and tells Mu-jin that Gang Jae is fleeing via a boat out the country. Only, before he does, Gang Jae actually rings Captain Cha and decides to give them some intel. In order to catch Mu-jin, he wants immunity, and if they grant him that, he'll give the police what they want. The trouble is, this all seems to be leading toward a big confrontation that's going to get Jae-woo into some serious hot water. While Gang Jae waits in position, Choi Mu-jin and the others show up. They're completely surrounded by the narcotics department officers, who are ordered to stay in position by Captain Cho. Waiting for most of the soldiers to be injured or incapacitated, Cho gives the order for them all to move in. Gang Jae skips away from the crowd and leads Mu-jin to a secluded area suspended above the ground. Jae-woo, unaware of the sting operation, shows up and charges toward where the pair are fighting. Pil-do also happens to be there, and watches as his partner charges into the thick of action. In fact, Gang Jae stabs Mu-jin numerous times, but just before hitting the killing blow, Jae-woo shows and holds him up at gunpoint. Now, if Gang Jae confesses everything, then her cover is blown. So naturally, she shoots him twice and watches as he falls to the ground while Pil-do witnesses this act. Mu-jin though manages to slip away, thanks to Taeju arriving just in time. The next scene begins with Mu-jin alive, but barely. Far enough away from prying police eyes, Taeju drops him off with a burner that he claims is safe. Mu-jin's destination is a reclusive mountain temple, where he's patched up by a monk there. However, Jae-woo is most certainly not safe. Following her actions, shooting Gang Jae in cold blood, she's in hot water with the police. Before she can face the music, Pil-do heads over to her place and shares a drink. He knows she shouldn't be alone and encourages her to loosen up and find some hobbies to occupy her mind. Given how tightly wounded she is, Jae-woo loosens slightly and opens up about her past, including how Gang Jae tried to rape her. This is enough for Pil-do to understand what's driving her, slipping away that night when he believes Jae-woo is asleep. In the morning, Jae-woo receives a package outside from Gang Jae, his final act of defiance. This happens to contain a picture of the police force with her father front and center. Only, her father happens to sport the name of Song Jun-soo. Now, given Cha said that he died shortly after joining the narcotics team and Sergeant Cho was killed for knowing too much, could it be that the police are involved after all? Jae-woo is determined to find out the truth and heads up to the temple where Mu-jin is currently recovering. There, he confirms that Dong-hoon was, in fact, an officer, but he flipped on them and shifted his allegiance. He saved Mu-jin's life, which served as the catalyst for when everything changed. Mu-jin never told Jae-woo all of this because, well, he wanted her to have conviction and find out for herself. This has been a lesson he's been trying to instill in her all this time, reinforcing that Dong-hoon lived and died by the organization. Will Jae-woo do the same? Well, according to Mu-jin, Cha is the one who killed her father as he couldn't face the betrayal. Pil-do remains dedicated to finding and stopping Mu-jin no matter what, but his dedication to the team and Captain Cha could well prove to be a decisive point. In fact, it's so decisive that Mu-jin doubts Jae-woo's ability to pull the trigger and instead tasks Taeju with killing the police captain. Taeju does just that, showing up in Cha's apartment that night and stabbing him numerous times. However, Cha gets a few good shots off to Mu-jin's right-hand man but slips away just as Jae-woo shows up at his apartment. She uses her bare hands to head inside, despite noticing the blood on the doorknob, and remains determined to find out the truth. Cha fires off a shot, but it wildly misses her. Finding out that she's Jae-woo, Cha weakly grabs an envelope and passes it over to her, just as Pil-do shows up. When he breaks in, Jae-woo slips out the window and makes it back to her car. In doing so, we find out the truth about Sang-hoon. It turns out Jae-woo's father was deep undercover and gave Mi-ji-woon a gold lighter. Unbeknownst to him, it had a tracker inside which Mu-jin found out by accident after using it to beat up one of his subordinates in the office. When the tracker slipped out on the floor, Mu-jin is livid and realizes he has a mole in the organization. To make matters worse, Mu-jin also finds a typewriter and numerous reports sent back to HQ. Turns out Dong-hoon was a cop through and through until the end. Cha even had a final letter from her dad, reinforcing this fact. Within the letter, Dong-hoon's final goodbye is all too much for Jae-woo, who finds herself distraught and shaken by what she's done. Determined to get rid of the organization's mark, she takes a lighter to her chest. The next scene begins with Jae-woo in hospital waiting to hear from the captain. He's hurt, having been in surgery for 4 hours, while Pil-do confirms they found blood and fingerprints at the scene. Are they Jae-woo's? Mu-jin realizes that Jae-woo has uncovered the truth and decides she needs to be killed. It doesn't take long before Jae-woo is grabbed outside her apartment, a bag thrown over her head and 3 goons dragging her to a bath full of water, ready to drown her. However, Jae-woo hits back. Taeju steps into the scene when Jae-woo dispatches the other goons and reveals the harrowing truth. It wasn't actually Mu-jin that killed Dong-hoon after all, it was him. He was the one who landed the killer blow. Jae-woo manages to thwart the threat of Mu-jin's subordinate as the pair fight, eventually leading to Jae-woo killing Taeju. Meanwhile, Pil-do and the other officers receive a tip-off from the temple about Mu-jin. Only, they don't actually have to wait given the crime boss shows up at the police station on his own accord. Now, it turns out Mu-jin has his own agenda here, which comes from antagonizing Pil-do about Cha and claiming these officers are prey for the predators. Mu-jin's lawyer happens to be Ms. Kong, who walks past the officers nonchalantly and sits with Mu-jin while he's being interrogated. When Jae-woo shows up, Mu-jin reveals that he's going to prove his innocence. However, Jae-woo is quick to dispel this confidence, claiming the mole, herself, can't be used anymore. She also mentions the warrant they're about to obtain, which will arrive in a little under an hour. According to Mu-jin, though, he can prove he's not the one responsible for his heinous actions. This proof comes in 2 forms. First up, the knife that Mu-jin used is removed from evidence while the police check the CCTV footage from the night of Cha's death and realize it matches Jae-woo's car and description. Jae-woo somehow manages to skip out the front of the station, as Pil-do can only watch in shock as she takes off. How on earth did none of the other officers stop her? Anyway, she gets away with the knife, subsequently resulting in Mu-jin released thanks to a lack of evidence against him. It would appear as if Jae-woo is planning this to get her revenge on the crime boss. It's also a test too on Mu-jin's part, determined to see how far Jae-woo is willing to go for her cause. Pil-do is unsure what to believe, reflecting back on Jae-woo's moments of vulnerability, while our protagonist grabs the knife and throws it in the water in the middle of a long stretch of road. She's alone, and it would seem that she's going after Mu-jin on her own. Meanwhile, Mu-jin heads back to Dongcheon Gym where he finds Taeju's corpse ready for him, serving as a warning that Jae-woo is ready to come for him now. After paying her respects to her father, Jae-woo prepares to leave, but is stopped by Pil-do. He figures out that she's at the crematorium, thanks to an earlier inquisitive eye at her apartment. There was no urn on the wall, and as such, Pil-do realized she was seeing off her father. Pil-do quickly arrests Jae-woo while Mu-jin decides to have Kong do everything she can to release her from custody. Why? Well, apparently he wants her to come for him. I guess he owes her that much. So, while Kong sets to work figuring this out, Pil-do sits down with Jae-woo and demands she open up and tell him her real name. The next scene begins with Jae-woo behind bars. Ms. Kong shows up with a message from Mu-jin, promising that she won't end up in prison if he has anything to say about it. In fact, Jae-woo is transferred to hospital not long after, which gives Mu-jin just the opportunity he needs to strike and bring Jae-woo in to him. Pil-do receives a call from Captain Cha while on watch, learning that he's awoken from his comatose state. Rushing over to see his boss, Cha covers for Jae-woo and reveals that she's Dong-hoon's daughter. He also unveils the truth about Song and how he was undercover, which in turn makes Pil-do realize that they've got the wrong person. He also confirms that Taeju was the one who stabbed him and that Mu-jin completely deceived her. Speaking of which, Mu-jin's guards infiltrate deep into the hospital as Jae-woo is helped out by an undercover nurse. She gives instructions for how to get away, as she single-handedly fights off 3 of her colleagues and slips out wearing a hospital gown. Only, Pil-do notices her in the parking lot and hurries up to see her. Having learned everything, Pil-do puts his trust in Jae-woo and brandishes his handcuffs, deciding to handcuff themselves together as a desperate ploy to stop them driving off to Jae-woo's death. A car chase soon ensues though, as Pil-do and Jae-woo work together to evade Mu-jin's goons. Eventually they do lose them out on the road. Realizing they need to lay low for a while, the pair drive to an abandoned beach resort that Pil-do's friend has rented out long-term. Pil-do helps patch up Jae-woo, cleaning the wound on her shoulder. This act of kindness, and his willingness to try and understand Jae-woo, sees our protagonist open up as the pair passionately kiss and make love. Well, that was certainly unexpected. Anyway, they decide to stick together and fulfill Dong-hoon's wishes of stopping Mu-jin no matter what. Mu-jin, though, is consumed by his unfinished business with Dong-hoon and Jisoo. He's convinced that everyone has betrayed him, unsure where else to turn. With an arrest warrant out thanks to an unspecified eyewitness, who is probably Captain Cha in truth, Mu-jin loses control and forces Ms. Kong out. Mu-jin dons a motorcycle helmet and hits the road, stopping at Jae-woo's car on the road where he shoots Pil-do in cold blood. As his body slumps lifelessly on her lap, blood oozing from a gunshot wound on his head, Jae-woo grabs his gun and takes off into the street. This is the last we see of Pil-do, but it's very clear that he's dead. With a gun brandished, Jae-woo heads straight into Mu-jin's club, using a single handgun to thwart an entire army worth of goons. It's basically John Wick at this point, but impressively shot nonetheless. Jae-woo fights through the room, hitting off for bullets before reloading. She then leaves a single bullet as she rides the elevator up to the penthouse. It's either a continuity error or this young woman has just taken a few too many blows to the head. Despite only holding a single bullet in her handgun, she takes out a hallway worth of soldiers, leaving her one-on-one with Mu-jin. Alone at last, Jae-woo confronts Mu-jin with her gun drawn, gritting her teeth as the boss talks about her father's lack of conviction. He had several chances to kill her and didn't take it. Mu-jin believes that she's different, almost salivating at the prospect of dying at her hands. After a little more talking, the pair eventually decide to get involved in a good old-fashioned knife fight. Jae-woo and Mu-jin duel it out with knives drawn, eventually leading to Jae-woo stabbing her enemy in the throat. She watches with satisfaction as he slumps down against the wall, bleeding out. With police bound for Mu-jin's base, Jae-woo stumbles away, a trail of blood following her. We then cut forward an unspecified period of time as Jae-woo pays her respects to her father, placing a picture of herself and Dong-hoon together on his grave. As she reflects back on the moments that have led to this point, Jae-woo pays her respects to Pil-do as the show comes to a close.